All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. We'll give it a second for people to trickle in here in the audience. We are really excited today to be talking all things nonprofit strategy, strategic review, joining accelerators, all that good stuff. And we've got three true experts on the line that I'm really excited to get into it all with. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pond. We host these discussions that are totally every Thursday at noon. You'll find me here talking with great folks like the ones today on a super broad range of topics. Pond itself is a one-stop shop for nonprofits to find the tools and services that power their missions. So any kind of software, consultant you're looking for, training, resources in general, we connect you with them in a really seamless way. And also you earn credits the more you participate to help pay for stuff. So you'll get $50 credit in your account just for giving us feedback on the session today. So you can visit this link in the chat and we'll also send it around to registrants afterwards. So thank you for being here. Without further ado, I definitely want to get introductions from all of our panelists today. And I would just love for everyone to share, obviously, who you are, who you work with, and just a few layers of your identity that are most important to you. So I would hand it over to Kristen to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mitch. It's exciting to be here with you all today. So my name is Kristen Flack. I'm a senior community manager at Mass Challenge. For those who don't know, Mass Challenge is the global network of innovators. We are a nonprofit, and our mission is to equip bold entrepreneurs to solve massive world challenges and create meaningful and sustainable change. We were founded in 2009, and we have 8 locations worldwide. And we run a number of competitive accelerators for early stage startups. And I'm really interested in this conversation because prior to joining Mass Challenge, I have worked in nonprofits for the last 10 or so years. And I've actually been on the nonprofit side of going through an accelerator. So it's something that I'm really passionate about because it made some really great changes in the organization I was with.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us today, Kristen. And Anna, would you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Anna Taylor. I'm the executive director of the Greater Sum. We are a small operating foundation with a mission of supporting innovation in the nonprofit sector. And we do that with grants and also with programs like our incubator and our accelerator. And I, like Kristen, spent a long time in the nonprofit sector before switching over to this side of work. And it's really satisfying and meaningful to be able to kind of share some of those aha moments and connect people who can help folks in that early stage of the nonprofit development.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. And Eric, you want to finish us off?
Yeah, you bet. Nice to meet you also, Kristen and Anna. Here, looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be fun. My name's Eric Ryan. I'm a co-founder of a business called Mission Met. And our entire purpose, our entire mission is to make strategic planning easier and more effective for nonprofit leaders. We serve primarily small and medium-sized nonprofits across the United States, do some work in Australia. We're talking to some folks in New Zealand, so we're trying to provide our services for a larger and larger geographic footprint. And I've been doing this particular type of work for about 25 years as a strategic planning consultant. And we've got a really fantastic team that are trying to help the nonprofit leaders do this work more effectively. So Mitch, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, before we get into it, I'll just say to the audience, make sure, jump into the chat and share your questions or introduce yourself. You've got real experts here on the line, so this is definitely your chance to get your questions answered, and we'll definitely get to all of them in the conversation. So please jump in there. I would love to kick it off just to kind of lay the foundation. And for folks who don't know or might want to ask, what exactly is a nonprofit accelerator? Anna, I'd love for you to share what your definition of that is and why it's important.
Yeah, sure. So an accelerator is a program that's going to bring together tools, resources, connections to help a nonprofit or for-profit accelerate their growth. Right. So this is the program that you look for when you kind of know that what you're doing works, you know it's important, and you really just want to get out there and ramp up the impact, the population that you're serving.
Awesome. And Kristen, like, who joins Accelerators? Who's the right kind of candidate to jump into that type of program?
Yeah, as Anna said, it's for both startups, for-profit and nonprofit, who are really committed to making a deep and meaningful impact on their community, in their industry, and they're ready to take that next step. It tends to be a little bit later stage than, say, an incubator that's really focused on the founder and creating a sustainable business model, and you're ready to propel into some real traction. I think a solid candidate for an accelerator is someone with a really solid team, who is able to participate in the program, engage really meaningfully, while also keeping the day-to-day business moving forward, which can be a challenge. And someone who's really looking to grow their network and build community, find a network of mentors and peers in their cohort that will sustain them and they'll carry with them after they exit the program.
Yeah, and so if someone has a team in place and they're entering an accelerator, obviously they've established some strategy and they've done some planning. Eric, what exactly is a strategic plan? Like, when are they made? When should they be remade? And where do you see that show up?
They should be made from day one. I bet, Kristen, and they're going to change a whole heck of a lot by day two. So when you're on the front end of that process, they will shift. The way that we think about a strategic plan, I'd actually define it slightly different, Mitch, is that we don't think of a strategic plan in isolation. We think of strategic planning as a broader concept. I suspect that Kristen and Anna, this will resonate for them, that in their work with the organizations that they're accelerators, that people will create a plan, but then they struggle to actually implement or execute upon it. And so, in response to your question around a definition, we like to say that, strategic planning isn't so much about a plan, but it's about a process, a component of which is a plan. And so, I imagine that Kristen and Anna would be saying the same thing if we're around, our roles are to help build their overall capacity in a variety of ways. And a plan is sort of the touchstone that has the things documented that we can reflect on and measure and track, but it's going to evolve and be revised over time. That mindset of thinking of this as an ongoing process is where you really get the return on your time and investment in this, as opposed to saying, here's our plan, let's do it. Here's our plan, let's do it, let's execute, let's measure, let's track it. So
great. Yeah, very much an ongoing experience, not like check the box and you're done exercise.
It's not an event. Yeah, it's not an event. Yeah.
Really, really helpful. And Anna, when you are talking with organizations about your programming, what's a common misunderstanding or some of the myths that you kind of break for people if they're reluctant or hesitant to work with you all?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's really about, the biggest misunderstandings is, well, number one, the terminology at incubator and accelerator, right? And the easiest way to remember it is incubator is when you're nurturing an idea, and accelerating is when you have it all, ready to grow, right? So that's kind of our biggest misunderstanding is, where do people fall? And it's not an obvious, oh, well, in year 1 to 3 and 3 to 5. And, it's very much about the way they pull together resources, networks, and, the specifics of what it is that they're implementing. So that takes a minute to pinpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, all these things we talked about, strategic planning, incubators, accelerators, these are all moments of catalyst for change. Like, they're accelerants or catalysts for something to be different. Kristen, do you find that there's like a common in people that are coming into your program, like why they know it's time to take action, or like what are the signposts that are like, we are ready for that sort of step change in what we're doing?
Certainly. I think that perhaps they've hit a bit of stasis. They have their plan in place, but they're looking to either on the for-profit side, meet new customers, roll out a strategy, or on the nonprofit side, they're ready to begin fundraising, and they need help with telling their story, creating that network, and building upon the plan that often comes out of an incubator or those early days of strategic planning. So that tends to be the stage at which people enter accelerators. But as Anna said, and it's so true, it's not a 1 to 2 year mark and 3 years plus. It really is about the life cycle of the organization. And I wanted to add too here that one common misconception that I've heard, and it kind of plugs into this, is that I don't have time to engage in this work right now. And it's just so important to thoughtfully find the time, because the lessons you can learn through strategic planning or through an accelerator might actually cut time out of your growth later on, because you're really building that foundation.
Yeah, we talk a lot within these series about change. Most of the things we're talking about, if it's an improvement or a change, and big changes are scary to people. Eric, have you found that there's are there ways to incrementalize approaching strategic planning where it doesn't have to start off as like this massive time suck and time investment? Are there some first steps that you like people to take to maybe even start getting ready or start moving towards a new strategic plan?
Yes, and that is, oftentimes one of the challenges we have is we have board members on our nonprofit that come from much larger organizations, and they have the capacity, the tools, the capacity at their organizations to have a much more involved, deeper planning process, and they sometimes try to bring that perspective to our smaller or even medium-sized nonprofit, and frankly, it can be damaging to our effort, because it's a mismatch. I'm sure that Kristen and Anna probably experienced that with some advisors that they maybe work with. Like the startup, the smaller organizations are a totally different beast. And so to your question, Mitch, around like sort of the basic elements of it, is that one of the first things that you can do to sort of like test your readiness for this is to simply ask the question of a vision. Do you have some clarity, you and your team have some clarity of the vision of where your organization is going to be at some point down the road? We typically say 3 years. There's some flexibility in that, but it's far enough out to where it has some vision, but it's not so far out that it's completely, we have no idea. And so being able to have that type of question that you and your team are wrestling with can provide some insights and catalyze the interest in like, okay, so we've got this vision, how are we going to get there? So you've got a reason for them to create the plan to take you in the direction of that vision.
And on that readiness point, Anna, I'd love to hear from you. What are some ways to assess, aside from establishing vision, if you're ready to jump into, because it is a time commitment, while it could end up in saving you a lot of time and being productive down the road, it is going to take some time. How do you make sure you're ready to get the most out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of having the capacity, and the fact that we're all mentioning it is because it is what we see a lot of times with people who, would get a lot out of it, but they simply don't have the bandwidth for it. And so that's one of those things to try, is work on your bandwidth, building up your team in a way that frees you for some of this strategy work. If there's a way to make that happen, it makes a big difference. But you've got to have the capacity, and then you've got to kind of have the conviction for it and the willingness to listen to somebody say, I would have done it differently, or have you thought about this, right? So there has to be a lot of, knowing what your vision is, where you're going, but then being open to different ways that the advisors and the experience might lead you.
And Kristen, I'd ask a similar question to you. When people do get accepted in the Mass Challenge, what is the prep? Is it summer reading that they get before they jump in, or what are the best ways to prepare and get the most out of an experience like that?
I mean, there's certainly orientation, which helps our startups plan for their summer. And that's really important when you're asking people to set aside time, is looking for an accelerator who's going to really clearly articulate what the expectations are so that you know how to meet it. And I think also in my own experience on the nonprofit side going through this, thinking about who should be on your team going through this. It's certainly leader of the organization, but you might also need some feedback and some buy-in from your board or from external stakeholders throughout the process. That was super helpful to me as a nonprofit worker. I think we would not have come through the Accelerator with the outcomes that we did if we had not engaged some really key partners and some board members in the process, because they gave some really great insight and some feedback. So really thinking through that team and understanding the time commitment. And so that's what we try to do at Mass Challenge, is set those expectations.
And Eric, are there potential clients that you turn away because you don't think they're ready? Like what are some red flags to know that your work won't be, the best applied in a current setting with a potential nonprofit customer?
Yeah, I'll respond to that in just a second, but it's what's coming up, I think, Mitch, as I hear Kristen and Anna, is I think all three of us are saying for sure a theme here, like this is sort of non-negotiable work around making time as a leader of an organization to think about building the organization as opposed to doing the work of the organization. And when you are building, I mean, that's the whole reason for capacity building in the nonprofit space, is when we do that work better, to Kristen's point, it makes time, it raises more money and so on. And so often, we get into a nonprofit to solve the problem, whatever it is around kids or nature or something. And we don't get into build an organization, but that's where we can really serve more kids or whatever. So I think that's a theme of all three of our work, from the accelerators or the strategic planning that's coming out, that this is non-negotiable work that a leader needs to be engaged in. To your question around readiness, I kind of don't even think that way, because I don't see this as like, well, you've been doing this for a while, now you're ready. Like, this is just from the beginning, and this is where Kristen and Anna's work is so important. They get people at the beginning to be creating that mindset from day one, as they're helping their organizations build up, like the mindset of like, this is just how you do this. There's not necessarily a readiness to do strategic planning. That's just part. I think one of the things that we think about with strategy is that we think it's too complex and we push it aside. Well, it's strategy, I don't need to worry about that. It's the logic is the same whether you're a 10-year-old organization or you're starting out. Where do you want to go? Where are we now? What are we doing to get there? It's a real simple sort of concept. So to a little more to your question though, Mitch, around have we turned people away that aren't ready? I think we will turn someone away if they have a vision of a overly grandiose process that we don't think is in their best interest. One of our favorite stories is an organization, we weren't involved in this, but it was an organization in 2009 that was created this 42-page strategic plan. Drop dead gorgeous, spiral bound, beautiful pictures, kids running through the fields, all that. It was really great in the way it looked, but it's 42 pages, 90 people were involved, took 6 months to do, and it was for an organization that was $25,000 in annual revenue and had one very, very part-time staff member. And they never did anything with it. And so, we would turn someone away that wants to do something we don't feel like is in their best interest, which would be something that is a mismatch for them. A little long-winded, sorry, Mitch.
No, it's all good. All super helpful. And I'd love to understand, because especially with the pandemic and being able to do all these great virtual things like we're doing right now, all of a sudden there's a lot of options. Like it seems like almost every one of these programs became remote and virtual. And so people now have decisions to make between different programs that might be a good fit for them. I'd love to hear from both Anna and Kristen, but Anna, what advice would you give in someone thinking about how to assess different kinds of programs, accelerators, incubators, et cetera?
That's a great question, Mitch. I think we've hammered home the part of look at the time commitment. Can you actually do it? Will you be able to do what they're asking you to do? But the other thing for me is to look at, who are the alumni of this program, and are they, similar in mission, in kind of organizational size or scope, and if you know anybody, talk to them. If you know anybody on LinkedIn who knows anybody, right? Like these are conversations that people are likely going to be happy to have with you. The same goes for the staff and the volunteers of the organization. If they have volunteers who share that on their LinkedIn, or those networks that you're trying to get into. looking at the network of the organization, where they are connecting people, that's going to be a big one. And also the organizations, the alumni orgs, are those folks that you would like to be connected with? You know, do you have questions, right? If there's an alum from 5 years ago who you're like, wow, that's where I want to be, you know, then you're seeing a track record there.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I'll just hammer home too, reach out to the accelerators, attend their info sessions, attend their office hours. We're here to help answer those questions. And any great accelerator should know the methodology, the outcomes, be able to really articulate what can be accomplished in the program. And so ask those tough questions. And again, just reach out. You're never going to be able to distinguish programs just based off of looking on the website alone. And that's why these free resources are available to help you make the right decision for your organization. Because we're all in the business of supporting startups and nonprofits and entrepreneurs. And that's our job, is to help you find the right fit. So ask those questions.
And Kristen, just for some specifics, like what are some of the best questions that you get asked by organizations that are in those info sessions?
Certainly, we get a lot of questions about our expert network. Mass Challenge is really powered by some really fantastic experts who serve as mentors, as judges for applications. So we get a lot of questions about who our experts are, what backgrounds they come from. So that's a common question. Certainly questions about time expectations, as we've hammered home here. Questions about how to submit a strong application, what we're looking for in a startup when they apply to the program, about the judging process. I think all of those should be top of mind when speaking with someone who works at an accelerator.
And Anna, any like good questions you'd want to flag or you'd encourage people to ask when they're assessing different programs? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Kristen's point was great, that the staff is there to talk about the program. If they're, making themselves accessible, I would ask about, kind of the outcomes and the experience, and, what qualities do your alumni have in common, that kind of thing. And also the time commitment.
Yeah. And Eric, I guess if someone's thinking about wanting a specific expert or getting to a specific consultant outside of the group setting that we've talked about, what are some of the best ways to find and assess those people? Because obviously there's thousands of people that could come in and be a consultant and help your organization.
Right.
How do you know when you've matched with the right one?
Yeah, right. That example I shared a few minutes ago about that 42-pager monster of a plan, that process was led by a couple of consultants that were used to working in the municipal space. So their process would have worked for the local city, perhaps, but it was a mismatch. So when you're looking for the right advisor or consultant to help, see if they have experience with organizations specifically like yours. We just got called on to a project. Well, this was actually last year, and their board members were trying to facilitate the process, and they were 2 years in and they hadn't gotten anywhere. And they called us in to help to unlock, break the logjam. And the real core problem was that their board members, as well-meaning and as smart as they were serving as sort of a consultant to the organization and trying to bring an approach that was just not resonating for the staff because it was for a different type of organization. So make sure that you have someone or someones that have experience with your type of organization size-wise. It doesn't have to be like an arts organization experience or, an educational, just more about like where you are as an organization at that point in time. And then the other thing that I would say, Mitch, that you'd want to ask or be sure about is that ask the person about their perspectives on executing the plan. Where you really benefit from this process is not and this is kind of what my first opening comments were, where you really benefit from the strategic planning work over time is not creating a plan, but using it, measuring it, tracking it, revising it, and building your team's muscle and culture around that. So when you're looking at bringing on a consultant or an advisor to help, see what their perspective is on that. And if that's part of how they will coach and help you, that's a really bright green flag that they get that that's where you would really benefit from this. Everybody does this work at an accelerator or strategic planning, whatever, wants to see their organizational capacity grow. And if you're only focusing on the plan, then it might not happen. So your consultant or advisor should help you make sure you've got a really good long-term multi-year process in place to make this work.
Sure. And when they're kind of in your process, Anna, what are some of the like sessions or like which subjects that, because obviously you're covering a broad range of things around capacity building. What do you typically find are like the faves? What's the most popular stuff that you cover?
I can tell you the least fave. The least fave is nonprofit accounting. And that is the one that most specifically and dramatically was asked for by our past grantees. So Greater Sum made a switch from just having an application and giving grants to getting a lot of feedback from our grantees on what they needed and building our incubator and accelerator programs around those. So the incubator, turning, like having the financial understanding to have a financial strategy and then matching that with your storytelling and your fundraising. And then the accelerator is totally targeted on fundraising for your organization. So we, in that incubator, not a lot of people they don't want to know the actual runway of how long until I don't have enough cash to run the organization, right? They don't always want to know the specific burn rate, how fast they're going through their cash, right? But get a handle on that information and your capacity as a leader just expands exponentially because you're making all of those decisions and you're participating in that strategy with a really firm base. This is what this costs, right? And so then that strategic plan is not something that you take back and go, I don't know how we're going to make this happen, right? It's something that you're like, yeah, there are goals, there are metrics, and we have plans in place for if it starts off fast or if it takes longer to kick in, right? So the least favorite topic that we cover is also the one that's where people really like click into future modules of our program and see the value of it.
That's super interesting. I mean, I was an accounting major in college, so you don't need to sell me on it.
But I might need you as an SME.
I'm definitely not a practicing accountant, but I've taken a lot of classes. Kristen, I'd ask you the same question. What do you hear? Especially, I know you have a program that covers both for-profit and nonprofit entities. Do you find some consistency in what the favorite pieces of the program are for nonprofit organizations?
I mean, to double down on what Anna said, that it all typically comes back to capital raising strategies, because at this stage of the startups that we work with, they're really looking at their runway for the next couple of years very closely. So practicing pitch, how to build a cap table, things like that, so that they're ready to go out and meet with investors or seek capital from a philanthropic side. That tends to be very popular. But we're industry agnostic, so it does have slightly different breakdowns by industry as well.
Interesting. And Eric, what do you find when you're going through a planning process with someone? What tends to be the aha moment? Do you find that there's like a part of your process where you see people kind of light up or something clicks and it kind of changes the trajectory of the work?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Kristen and Anna are really talking about. When we've never ever seen strategic planning work well, never, at an organization unless there are one and ideally two people at the organization that we call champions that champion the process. And an aha moment, ideally soon in our engagement and working with them, they understand that. And I think that's what Kristen and Anna are talking about. Like, you really need to make sure that you and your team and that this is a time commitment to building our capacity. We have to dedicate time to it. And this is part of how we're going to have a bigger impact. And so the top moment is when that one or two people really gets it. Like, this is part of my job. It's not just to help this mission or, help this, that whatever. Like, part of my job is to ensure that our team has this planning process in place. When that moment happens, if they don't have it when they first start engaging with us, that makes everything, when they do have that makes everything downstream so much more effective. They've transitioned as a leader to a higher, more passionate, convicted level, then they'll be able to really lead this process.
Yeah, I guess asking a kind of slightly different question, but related, Anna, what do you find tracking your alums? What are your most successful alums do you find have in common after they come out of your program?
I would say that the thing that my most successful alums have in common tends to be their willingness to look beyond themselves to the capacity of the organization. So, remember, we work with very early stage organizations. So a lot of them, it's like, maybe it's just one person, maybe it's a team of volunteers, but what the successful organizations have in common is they are bringing more people in, they're bringing more people on board. They're, using that storytelling experience as a way of bringing more people into the story. So yeah, that's probably a convoluted way of saying they're really good networkers, but that's what it is. It's on behalf of the organization. They don't see it as, oh, well, now I'm personally connected to Eric and Kristen and Mitch. It's like we are a web of people who have similar interests and missions, and there's things we can accomplish together, and they're always looking at that.
Yeah, Kristen, I'd be curious, do you find that there's some consistency across, I know success is can mean different things to different people. Maybe we say thriving, thriving alumni. What do you see in common once they're out of the program?
Yeah, completely what Anna said. And they continue to stay engaged with that network that they've built after they exit the program. They are engaged alumni. So that tends to be an indicator of success as well. I'd also say very coachable. We work with some of the smartest people I have ever met. They are leaders in their industry, but they're coming to us for that mentorship piece because perhaps this is the first startup that they founded. So the ability to take in advice and information from their mentors that are working with them, while also maintaining their vision for the startup. It's a tough balance, but those who do it and do it well see a lot of success from that.
And something that's come up in a couple different forms, whether we call it storytelling or vision, I would just be curious because it's easy to say, be a good storyteller or come up with a good vision. Eric, do you have any how can someone get better at storytelling? How can they get a better job? How can they do better at setting vision for their organization?
Well, I will, let me try to answer this, and because what came up to mind when you first said it is at the heart of your culture of an organization is clarity around your mission and vision. And that's part of, a core component of a nonprofit strategic plan. And we help our nonprofits create a cause and effect sort of relationship between their mission statement and their vision statement. And so essentially the mission, what we do and for whom, and if we do that well, then the vision will happen. And so you'll be able to connect the two. And so if you and your team are clear on that story, this is what we hope the world will look like, and our mission is to do this to get the world to look like that, That's where the passion, the heart, where you connect with the heartstrings of the people you're trying to bring on board as staff or board members or funders or whatever. So to your question, if you can dial in that simple and focused cause and effect mission statement approach, you're not only you're able to create, that can form the basis of your story that you're trying to capture the hearts and minds of those that you're engaging with.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That like the story start. I love that you've tied the two together as kind of like the beginning of the story. Like you've started and you've progressed to vision, and then the remainder of your storytelling stems from that. It's a really interesting frame.
Well, what's interesting, and I know Kristen and Anna are going to appreciate this. All of the, and Kristen, or Anna, you're actually relating to like the fundraising element of it once they get going, like really building that muscle. What we like to say with from a all the nonprofits are interested in developing the funding to get the capacity they need to do their programs better, bring on staff, et cetera. The first part of that story that we're referencing about the heart, this is our mission and vision. You're going to pull people in with that, but you're going to keep them there if you can also connect with their head. And you'll connect with the person, the donor's head, the whoever's head, if they know that you've gone through this accelerator or this incubator, or you have the strategic planning process, that you're committed to building the organizational health and strength of the organization. Now you've got them not just for giving you a $5,000 donation, but it's a $5,000 over the next 5 years, each year, because they know you're a good bet. We believe in your mission and vision. You've got a good story, and boy, you've got this organizational capacity to back it up. That's going to make you really kick butt and really have a much better possibility of hitting your impact. So we'll help you out. Sounds great. And that's the full story that really is enticing to people that want to support you. So you can get them interested with the mission vision stuff, but you hold them if they know that you're doing stuff right. And that's what Kristen and Anna are trying to do, and what we're trying to do at Mission Met.
Yeah, it strikes me too that it's obvious that everyone's focused on fundraising. That's like the number one thing you'll always hear from a nonprofit leader or a startup leader. But it's clear how getting your storytelling mission vision down that transcends across hiring and motivating your team, your volunteers, like really, and even your audience that you're trying to serve. Anna, I'd be curious to hear from you, like, what is good storytelling for a nonprofit leader? Like, what does that mean to you? When do you recognize it and see that in someone that you're working with, either in their application or in the program?
Great question. Hard to pin down. Great question. I will say that the thing that gets me excited about a nonprofit leader telling their story is when it is really tapping into both their lived experience and their expertise. So the stories that are the most compelling are those that you would be telling whether you were running a nonprofit about this or not, right? Like it's just, this is how I walk through the world and this is what I experience. So the Greater Sum was founded to support innovation, and that's where we get really excited, is when somebody is like, because I have experienced this and because this my area of expertise, I am doing this specific thing, this specific intervention. And it's so dynamic, it's so impressive. And what we then want to set about doing, and it's fun to see my volunteers kind of kick into action and want to do this, is please get rid of any aggravating roadblocks that are getting in the way of this person doing this thing, because it needs to happen. And that, like that storytelling impact is so powerful because that person's potential impact is unique.
Yeah, when I see this done well too, it's I feel like organizations and leaders go from trying to figure out how someone can help them to the person that hears their story figuring out how they can, be a part of the mission or help them in whatever capacity that is, donor, volunteer, even employee. And I think that's that saves you a lot of work just by doing a better job communicating and showcasing your story personally and as the organization. Kristen, I'd love to hear from you too. Where do you see great storytelling show up? Like, what does that mean to you? Are there common threads that tie those great stories together?
Oh goodness, I feel like I have a hard time articulating it better than Anna did. But one thing I will say is the ability to tailor that really powerful model that Anna just mentioned to a variety of audiences. Sometimes, especially in the work that we do, the solutions are highly technical. And so knowing how to translate your solution to maybe some investors who might not be familiar with the technology that you're creating, or from a nonprofit lens, if the solution is really innovative, there might need to be some education, but continuing to tie it back to impact and vision, I think is a really effective combo.
And one thing, Kristen, I'd love to, while you mentioned it, because you brought up these different audiences or stakeholders too. I think people like to put startup for-profit in a box and startup nonprofit in a box. Obviously, you have a different perspective at Mass Challenge, incorporating them both into a single program. Like, could you just share a little bit about like why that is? What are the differences and what are more of the similarities? Because I assume that helps both of those kinds of participants to be there together.
Certainly. I mean, we just fundamentally believe that solving real major challenges means that solutions can come from anywhere, from any industry, from anywhere in the world. And different models will answer that question differently. But the fundamentals are the same, in that you need a solid plan and a team, a community of supporters, and mentorship and expertise along the way. So there's a reason why they're in the program together, because they can learn a lot from one another. But ultimately, solving those big challenges, be it climate change or major health challenges, it's going to take both the for-profit and the nonprofit space to engage together.
Yeah, and Eric, I'd love to hear from you too. What are some of the strategies that you end up recommending to your, obviously every case is different, and that's why folks need to work with an expert. But in general, when you're making recommendations to organizations, what are the most common things that almost are a part of your recommendation list with just about everyone? Like, are there, if you could get a message out to like every nonprofit leader out there that you feel like comes up in every strategic review, what are some of the most common things that you wish people could start implementing today, even before they go through a formal accelerator or formal strategic review?
What's coming up are some things we've already highlighted, and I'll try to see if I can come up with something more original. But the recommendations is who's going to really lead and own this process. Not own, because everyone wants to be, you want to have everyone engaged on your team, but really who's going to lead that, and are we clear on who that, who's going to make sure that we do strategic planning well? Are we going to, as a team, view this as a process as opposed to an event? Because again, in the strategic planning world, it's so commonly viewed as an event that becomes a barrier a significant barrier to success. So a truth is, do you have the champions leading? A truth in the strategic planning space of success is, are we approaching this as a process? Another thing is building from the very beginning a simple habit around measurement. We haven't talked about that, but that's but you manage what you measure, and just simple basic measurement, building that muscle as you grow as an organization. That's become more and more of a expectation of funders and stakeholders, that you can demonstrate your impact and being able to measure that. So even if it's just 2 or 3 things that you're measuring from the front end, so building that in, and you don't have to have a strategic plan to measure as you're going along. Another thing that is just, the boards of directors in the nonprofit space, thinking about the differences between the for-profit and the nonprofit space, the board of directors, are a, in the nonprofit piece, is a strategic difference for sure, and how you as a leader navigate and work with your board. And one of the key pieces that we encourage, if it's not already happening, is for the most important relationship in the nonprofit, we believe, is between the executive director and their board chair. And if there's some mismatch there, there's potentially a lot of mismatch downstream. So, you don't have to have a strategic plan to make sure that the board chair and the executive director are connecting, talking, working together, ensuring that the vision and the ideas and the feedback and guidance from the board is helping the executive director, and that the board isn't, there's a lot of different board models depending upon the status of where the organization is, but that relationship is something that can be built on regardless of the strategic planning. So
yeah, those are awesome. Those two things in particular, measurement and boards, I think are huge, because what are you assessing? You don't have any numbers to look at. And I think that is something that people struggle with when they're so thick in the weeds of doing the work to make sure they're gathering the data and information around it. So that's a huge one. And boards, I think, that's a huge difference for a nonprofit, just functionally, that like you've already got a board of several people in place to just be established as a nonprofit. There's no requirement for that as a startup in the for-profit space whatsoever. Anna, how do you see our boards generally like a part of your accelerator? Do they get involved? Are they supportive? Like, what does that dynamic tend to be like?
Yeah, some do. We've even had a few executive director board chair pairs go through the process together. And that, in some cases, the schedules don't align. It's a little tricky. And so the executive director is communicating out to the board chair. But when they've gone through together, it's been kind of I get the sense it's a more impactful experience just because they're able to keep circling back. One of the biggest risks when you do a program like, maybe one of the biggest areas of knowledge loss, right, is if you go to the session, you had the session on your calendar, you went to the session, you close your notebook when you leave the session, and then next time they have a session, you're like, okay, where was it? Oh, I was going to do stuff, right? And, when you go through with that kind of learning partner, accountability partner, it becomes something that you're talking about and engaging about, in your day-to-day work. And that is powerful. So yeah, I think for a lot of organizations, it's just not feasible. That's not the relationship they have with their board chair. That's not, their board chair's availability might not be that way, but definitely figuring out a way to bring it back and forth, so that your board is not just like hearing a bunch of new strategy from you with no context.
Yeah, I think that communication is so key, because otherwise people are just left in doubt. So coming up with some good ways to make sure it doesn't need to be time consuming, it doesn't need to be perfect. I think that stands in the way of a lot of communication for leaders too, is some perfectionism, when really something short and sweet and quick it satisfies people, and then they're on board and they're supportive. What you brought up about making sure you're actually engaged with the content between specific sessions, I think that is amazing advice. Kristen, I'd love to hear if you have any other kind of best practices for the folks in your program that you see getting the most out of it, in addition to that, like just engage with it on an ongoing basis, not just when you're here with us in a session.
Yeah. On that engagement piece, we don't have a requirement that you have to attend X number of sessions. What we do ask for is transparency and really meaningful engagement. So that does mean checking in with your mentor during your scheduled times, deciding which sessions are going to be most meaningful for you based on the goals that you set with your mentor, attending those sessions and continuing that work. So it's exactly what Anna said, that it's a 4-month program with us. And yes, there are sessions that happen throughout, but it really is a 4-month program. And a lot of that work happens between you and your mentor, you and your cohort throughout the run of the program.
And we talked earlier about the shift, how the world's really opened to more of these programs for people being virtual. Anna, what do you see? What are some of the benefits you see, given that nonprofit work can be so localized and often fragmented, and people are kind of in their own world and their own community? Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see that exposure to organizations in other parts of the country or other parts of the world, how you've seen that change the work for people within local communities?
Yeah, that's That's an interesting one. We launched our virtual incubator May 2020. So we, had a big bump in the number of people applying for the program simply because now they could, so of course we're big fans of virtual connections, and we've seen some really exciting and unplanned kind of collaborations among organizations that we serve that wouldn't, the probability of those organizations existing in the same local community would be much lower, so I do think it's exciting. We try to take in different sessions different approaches to introducing yourself and your organization, and try to see people not only around their mission area but kind of how they do their work. And like a lot of the problems that people are trying to solve are similar in terms of how they use technology. I sent a lot of them Mitch's way at Pond, but also like how they do communication, collaboration, that kind of thing. And so we see people sharing information, but we also see like actual literal partnerships. We had 2 organizations connect on our incubator website because one uses child life specialists to support children after disasters, and another provides translation services after disasters. And so they're now collaborating on work in Ukraine. And, they're based in completely different places and spaces, but it's that virtual connection that made it possible. And when you have a lot of people doing similar work, they'll talk about, strategies for volunteer management and logistics and all kinds of things that they're experiencing locally in very different localities.
Yeah, that's awesome. Eric, I'm sure so whenever you engage a consultant, that's part of the value you get is they're seeing things that a number of different organizations apply to yours. I'd just be curious if that's, have you had specific instances where you've been able to be like, well, this other organization we worked with in California is super relevant to what you're doing over here in New Hampshire. And how does that play out with your clients?
All the time. There's some of the themes we've been talking about are the truths that apply, the leadership, the process, the measurement, all the time we're able to share those different stories. And we don't serve at Mission Met. Our customer base are not for-profits. We exclusively serve nonprofits, but I think the model of having the nonprofits and for-profits together, working together, is great from the perspective of being able to learn from each other and getting some out-of-the-box ideas. We get stuck in our way, like one of the, the board has to be involved in strategic planning is sort of a paradigm. It doesn't really have to be. You could do it a different way. We've got organizations that the board's never involved and they're knocking it out of the park. Some are really involved. There's different ways. And so having that, I think those two different, for-profits and nonprofits working together could work really well. We get some really great insights from some of our customers in Australia that are doing a lot of work around measurement, and that's applying to some of our customers here in the U.S. So, yeah, there's a lot of commonalities that aren't just about the type of work they do, but they're just organizational development common themes.
Yeah, and Kristen, I know you mentioned from the jump that Mass Challenge is intentionally global in where you work and the organizations that you bring in. How have you seen that play out within your member base and how people are solving problems by connecting and interfacing with folks internationally?
Oh, it's been a huge change moving to a fully virtual model, but I think it's been really positive. We also have 3 offices worldwide, one in Switzerland, one in Mexico City, and one in Israel. And so being able to collaborate more closely with those teams and the startups that come through those programs has been fantastic. Working with corporate partners from anywhere in the world, finding experts who might have particular expertise in a country where maybe a startup is looking to make a move. Those kinds of things are so much easier on a virtual platform. I'll also add, I think it's relevant to this conversation, one green flag when looking for an accelerator is one that really intentionally does DEI work in everything that they do, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because when we're talking about building a community, a cohort where you're sharing ideas, having a wide variety of experiences at the table shuts down groupthink. It leads to more innovation. So that's a green flag when you're talking to accelerators, and something that I'm really proud of at Mass Challenge.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, because it's definitely is a big, anytime that you're wanting to be in a group to come up with something new, that diversity, it mirrors biological ecosystems, right? The more diversity, the healthier it is. And as Anna knows well, the more innovation you get from polarity of ideas and experiences. So in addition to seeing yourself or where you want to be from the alumni and participants, I think it's a great flag to say yes, and seeing people that are different from you, so you can have exposure to a lot of people in different settings, because that's clearly super powerful. Have you ever seen any competition? Like, has it ever been competitive if two people are trying to tackle similar problems? Does that ever come up, or should that not be a concern of someone applying to your program, Kristen?
I haven't seen it. No, it tends to be a very collaborative model. We encourage, with kind of smaller group pods, some like-minded founders to work together. So it's certainly not encouraged. We do have equity-free cash prizes at the end of the program, so there's some fun competition at the end with a great incentive, and we encourage that kind of competition to compete for those equity-free cash prizes, and less so while in the program.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think in general, that's one of the biggest perks of the nonprofit space, is the opportunity for collaboration. We're all looking at a very aligned goals and trying to just do the best we can and have the most impact. But I think sometimes that'll be front of mind for people, is it going to be competitive? And it's really helpful to hear. It's hard to believe we're coming up on an hour here, and I just want to make sure before we close, we've talked a lot about strategy in general for nonprofits, but also the moment in time we're in now, coming out of the pandemic, being able to engage virtually with a wider audience, all these things. I'd love to just hear from each of you, like, what's your biggest goal? If we were having this conversation 5 years from now, what are some of the biggest themes you hope have progressed or changed, or what'll be different? What does this conversation ideally look like in the future for you, Anna? You didn't want to go first. I can start with someone.
I didn't want to go first this time.
I'll go. Anna, I'll bail you out here. My hope is that when we look back at those organizations that successfully made it through the pandemic, they had already established a strategic conversation as a part of their operational DNA. That's just how they did it. The organizations that struggled, they didn't have anything. They had no clarity on where they were going. Therefore, they didn't have a way to sort of, benchmark against that. So my hope 5 years from now is, looking back, the organizations have learned their lesson, and they've got this strategic muscle built into their organization. They've got a document, they track it, they measure it, they talk about it, they revise it, and they're able to then respond much more effectively. That's my real hope. The other, real quick, Mitch, I know we're going to hop off. If it's okay, I'm going to put a link to our book, a PDF in the chat. And there's some free resources that talk a lot more about this stuff. So I just stuck it in there. You can share it with your audience as you all see fit. But it's a free PDF version of our book around strategic planning. And I just want to capture that. So,
yeah, no, great flag, Eric. And just a reminder to everyone, this session will be available on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We put a blog post summary out afterwards, a podcast. So we'll include all these resources in there too. So definitely be on the lookout for that. But Anna, you ready?
I'm ready. Yes. And like Eric, I do want to put out there a link to the application for our incubator, which is the nurturing part. It's free. It's 6 weeks. It's a lot of, deep attention to your nonprofit and your mission. And the deadline's May 27th. And in terms of how I'd like to see these conversations changing, I really want to see changes in the philanthropic sector, because what my dream is to be able to say, oh, well, let me tell you about these nonprofits, right? And for foundations and, major donors to have a little more networking accessibility. We talk about this local, national. It's often like, it's hard for nonprofits to figure out who the right people to talk to about what they're doing is and what that right methodology looks like. So, as we think about network building, I really believe it's about networking on behalf of these organizations that we're excited about, for those of us that work in the incubation space, and for foundations looking in new places. For, my founder, the donor who made Greater Sum possible, when we were looking at our funding priorities, he goes, Anna, I don't know where the next great idea is going to come from. And he's like, that's your job, find them. Right. And so I put all this work into finding them, and I want to be able to say, hey, here they are.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And Kristen, you get the final word here.
Oh, goodness. Anna's was so good, and I just want to steal her answer. But yeah, continuing to expand access to powerful networks through community. Starting this and growing an organization or a startup is incredibly lonely, and you need to find like-minded people and different people to push back and continue to grow your organization. So yeah, continuing that access.
Awesome. Well, sorry, we've gone a little bit over here, but we clearly had tons of ground to cover and so many good thoughts and insights. I appreciate everyone's time today. Just a quick reminder, this is brought to you by Pond. If you can give us some feedback on the session, we'll give you a little perk of $50 in your Pond account to spend on whatever your organization needs most through the Pond platform. So give us a look and give us some feedback, and we'll see you here next Thursday. Thank you.